Welcome back to The Heat. Before making his way to the United States, Chinese President Xi Jinping made his first state visit to the Czech Republic. President Xi and Czech Republic President Miloš Zeman witnessed the signing of a wide range of business deals from automobiles to finance and tourism. China also promoted its Belt and Road initiatives. Well, joining us now from New York is Nong Hong. She's the Executive Director and Senior Fellow at the Institute for China-America Studies. From London, we're joined by Stephen Perry. He is the chairman of the 48th Group Club and a writer and commentator on China. Also with us from Beijing is Jia Xiudong. He's a senior research fellow with the China Institute of International Studies. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Jia Xiudong, let me start with you. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Washington right now for the Nuclear Security Summit. He will also be holding a bilateral meeting with President Obama. What do you expect to come out of these meetings?
Well, the Nuclear Security Summit is a success story for China-U.S. cooperation in this regard. So I believe that President Xi Jinping will show that China is willing to continue to work with the United States to improve nuclear security around the world. At the bilateral level, of course, the two presidents are expected to compare notes on major issues, bilateral, regional, and globally. For example, President Xi Jinping might share his view and comment about the status of Chinese economy and what China is doing to maintain a momentum of economic growth, and while at the same time work with other countries for a balanced economy for the world. Of course, they have a lot of other issues to address to manage their differences, for example, over the South China Sea issue, so that it will not become an area of strategic rivalry.
Okay, Stephen Perry, I just want to take a step back to the earlier visit President Xi made to the Czech Republic. It was the first visit that he made to Central Europe as head of state. The president said that this visit marks the beginning of a new phase in their relationship. What is the significance of that trip?
Well, first of all, the Czech Republic is one of the most beautiful countries. It's right at the center of Europe. It's right at the center of European history. It's a country with a very educated population and quite a sophisticated engineering set of activities. And if you may recall, after the Soviet Union ended, the Germans moved in to support Skoda and invested in Skoda, and Skoda has become one of the world's great brands. So I think when China looks at the Czech Republic, it's looking at a country with a deep history and an opportunity for a combination which will help both countries significantly. But beyond that, we're looking at the western end of OBOR, One Belt, One Road, the new Silk Roads. As the Silk Roads begin to develop into Europe, it is in the Czech Republic and around there that the real activity on the western end of it in Europe will be seen. So it's important from that point of view. Also, the Czech president attended the 60th VA anniversary in Beijing, and the relations between Central and Eastern European states and China is not so well understood in many places, but 16+1 is the relationship between those Central and Eastern European states and China, and the 16 heads of state visited China, Hangzhou, in December and had meetings at the premier level with Premier Li Keqiang, and this is raising the level of relationship between those states, and in particular the Czech Republic and China, to that of a presidential level. Usually when Xi Jinping visits a big country, he usually visits a smaller country as well. So this is very typical of his travel, of what is probably the most traveled Chinese president I've ever seen.
Nong Hong, let's go to the other side of the Atlantic right now and look at the relationship between the United States and China. One of the big differences between these two countries, and it seems to emerge very frequently, is the status of islands in the South China Sea. They've been the source of rising tensions between Washington and Beijing. There are issues of China's sovereignty, there's issues of China's territorial integrity. What do you think is a constructive approach to resolving this?
Well, It's very interesting development. The South China Sea used to reflect the differences among the six claimant parties in terms of sovereignty claims, in terms of maritime sovereign rights, on the interpretation of law of sea convention and international law. But right now, what's being presented to us, it has become an issue between the United States and China, which already affect the U.S.-China relations, and which represent the two interest groups of the law of sea convention. One is the coastal state by China, the other is like user state by United States. And I think if we understand correctly from U.S. Official statement, its concerns in the South China Sea is based on its concern about whether its freedom of navigation will be affected by the existing maritime disputes. And it's also concerned whether the South China Sea will be peaceful or stable. If that is what the American is actually looking for, that's exactly the same goal with China. Well, freedom of navigation, also peaceful and stable situation in the South China Sea will meet each other's common goal.
Jia Xiudong, another issue of deep concern to both countries, and that is the threat, the nuclear threat from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And there appears to be a fundamental difference here between the United States and China on how they approach this. China is looking at a change in policy, and the United States is looking at a change in regime. So, how do they resolve this?
Certainly at this moment, people may feel frustrated that we see a situation of more nuclear tests and missile launches, followed by more United Nations Security Council sanctions, followed again by more nuclear tests and missile launches. It's kind of a cycle of escalating tensions, and the escalated tensions do no one good. So at the end of the day, diplomatic solution will be the only viable option actually, because no parties on the Korean Peninsula and in the region can afford a war or even or confrontation between the DPRK and the United States, or the DPRK and the ROK, Republic of Korea. And of course, at this moment, it's very difficult to resume the six-party talks, which is a process which has achieved some progress in the past, but it has been installed for several years. The situation may get worse before it's getting better. That being said, there's still hope, because behind all the rhetoric of tough talks of the DPRK, there are still, I can kind of hope that the country, DPRK, can talk with the United States directly, and also the ROK also would like to have a kind of bilateral dialogue with the DPRK, even though it's this will be very difficult at this moment.
Stephen Perry, looking broadly at China's role in the world, it is making its presence felt on the international stage. As you pointed out a moment ago, President Xi Jinping is one of the most traveled Chinese presidents. He's attended most of the important global summits, and he attended something like 14 major nations last year alone. So when we look at China now playing a role at the Nuclear Security Summit, do you think that's going to be a pretty important and big role there?
Oh yes, I think we've seen quite a significant change in China's presence in the world. Whilst it still stands by its principles of peaceful coexistence and non-interference in other nations, its presence in the discussions between nations to address major crises have had a significant effect. And probably the best example of that is the situation in Iran. And if we go back a few years, people were talking about a similar situation with Iran that they're now talking about with North Korea. The policy of China of engagement, of discussions, of negotiations, and combined with other measures, led to a solution in the Iran situation that was acceptable to all. So when you just posed the question just now about the difference between the American approach and the Chinese approach on North Korea, it was actually the issue of negotiations and six-party talks that the Chinese wanted to have in the United Nations resolution for it to be approved. It was this combination of both sides of the argument of the ways of getting countries motivated to find solutions. So I think we're seeing the presence of China in terms of the words that are used, because China is now recognized by America, by Europe, as being a nation that needs to be taken into account in working out ways of getting important resolutions through the Security Council.
Nong Hong, how do you see Chinese foreign policy evolve in the future? There are some scholars who say that there is a belief in China that the world is now in the midst of a historic change that might see the end of U.S. domination on the globe. And we heard the Chinese leaders telling us just a few weeks ago that Foreign Minister Wang Yi said he talked of building a new type of major power relationship. How is that goal unfolding? What did he mean by that?
Well, that's a very bold and very important concept raised by Chinese government about the new type of new relations between the great power. I think the key concept in this phrase about the mutual trust and the peaceful coexistence and also healthy competition and also win-win and through cooperation. I think those key concepts should be respected and should be recognized by China and the United States. I think what China is not seeking or taking the same approach as the states to aiming to dominate the international system. I think China is actually in a learning process of how to become a responsible and also playing a constructive role in global affairs. I think in this regard on how to build up a new type of great relationship between China and the United States, I think, well, given there are a lot of common interests between the United States, such as climate change and such as cybersecurity, such as like in the cooperation in maritime domain, there's a lot of ways for the two countries to work together to find the common grounds and to defeat the differences and to find a way that how to coincidence or win to achieve the win-win solution in global affairs.
Right. Stephen Perry, one final point on the China-Europe relationship. Is China here looking at Europe as a market now for Chinese companies? You know, the biggest trade relationship, of course, is between China and the United States, but is China now rebalancing, saying we've got to look to Europe as well?
Well, I don't think there's a very significant shift in that respect. The Chinese have long looked upon Europe as an important destination for their goods, for their companies, and now increasingly for their investment, especially as investment between America and China is a little bit difficult. Europe does present some better opportunities for China. But the important change in the relationship between Europe and China is going to be around One Belt, One Road. This transformatory economic development, which will sweep across Central Asia into Eastern, Central, and Western Europe, is going to transform the economic opportunities for Europe. And this is coming from China, so that the Europeans are getting ready to respond to the Chinese initiative for this whole new playing field called Eurasia. I think it's a great time for Europe-China relations.
And that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for joining us.